Welcome this week in Missouri Politics Overtime. We're here with Jason Rosenbaum. Jason, I'm really glad you stuck around. Thank you so much. When we had you in studio, wanted to shoot a little bit extra time with you. Appreciate you being here and sticking around.
Well, thank you for having me again.
I want to talk to you because it's such an interesting time to talk about the media and politics and politicians and government, probably spurred by Donald Trump. We saw the press conference this week that was essentially like a debating sparring session. I wanted to get your thoughts on what you've seen, not just this week, but overall from the president, where the media is concerned.
Well, we're both professional wrestling fans. It almost seemed like a Royal Rumble at there. And, you know, my focus is on state and regional politics, and I've tried not to get too fixated with national politics because it can be overwhelming. I am very concerned with how the media is being portrayed. Not necessarily like how national outlets are being portrayed, because I'm a fiercely local reporter, but I think that there's a concerted effort among, frankly, some conservative elements to delegitimize journalism by calling legitimate news outlets fake news. And I think that there is definitely a more aggressive posture against the president, but the president has also said some things that require pushback. Locally, for example, he made the claim that Ferguson was one of the most dangerous cities in the world during the campaign. Well, that's just flatly false. Yeah. And I know that there are a lot of people in Ferguson, both politicians and residents, who are incredibly offended by that remark, especially when Trump has never been to Ferguson and didn't actually go there during the campaign. So it is incumbent, when that sort of thing happens, for journalists to say, no, that's not true. Where are you getting this information, and why do you come to this conclusion?
So what I hear from people is, I have some sympathy for this. There's been a long-term, I don't even know if it's a bias towards liberals, maybe a bias against conservatives, because I've seen some journalists that I assume are pretty liberal push very hard on liberal politicians, but maybe same circumstance, push a little harder on conservatives, and maybe even more, it's an East Coast elitism that's put off by some of the more national media. I think Donald Trump, it's like you mentioned on the show, a thrice married New York billionaire, is an odd messenger. And while I've thought before conservative politicians have had a reason to push back and were sometimes probably right to do so, he seems like he's taking small things where he's even wrong and blowing them out of proportion. There's a proportional response to things.
Well, as I kind of mentioned on the show, he is a relative newcomer to politics. I don't want to say he's a complete newcomer, because he dabbled in the political realm before he ran.
He certainly knows media.
He does, and frankly, he used the media during his campaign to great success. How many times have I gone on Twitter and said, like, his speeches were aired uninterrupted, or he got to call on the phone where his contemporaries had to do satellite feeds.
But he was interesting, and he got ratings.
He did, and I think that's the reason why it happened.
Sure.
And now he's kind of attacking those same media outlets that essentially helped him become president. Maybe because, similar to a professional wrestler who attacks the city that they're in, the cheap heat, so to speak, it must be gratifying to some elements of his base. But long term, I'm just not sure how successful that's going to be. There's always going to be an adversarial relationship between the press and a president. I don't think that there ever is going to be like a lovey-dovey relationship here, but I think that this is kind of going to certain extremes.
I might be the most loyal reader that you have, and I read your stuff, and I've got to know you, so I kind of read between the lines sometimes. I understand where some conservatives feel like there is a liberal bias in the media. I think there's an honest group of conservatives that feel that way. I get where they come from there. I don't think it's as bad as Donald Trump's portraying it. I also think he's a bit of a flawed messenger, because some of the stuff he says, it's not biased to say something's untrue when it's untrue.
That's what I'm trying to say. And I've followed national media trends since I was in high school, and I certainly know that there has been a movement among conservatives to push back against what they perceive as liberal bias in the media. Are there reporters with liberal bias? Sure. Are there reporters with conservative bias? Probably not as many.
Did Barack Obama push back against Fox News? Try to kick him out of the pool?
I mean, there are examples of that. But interestingly, you know, Fox News was one of the most aggressive people against Trump during the campaign, and they've kind of done a 180 generally.
So let me talk just real briefly a couple minutes here before you have. I know you have to go, but I want to talk about how some of the stuff Trump's done. has trickled down into other people. I've noticed people that we cover are more aggressive since Donald Trump started running for office, and it's a trend of kind of limiting access, changing access, or when you do talk to the media, being very aggressive with them. I don't know that that's good for the country, and I'm not sure that's going to serve some of those folks well long term.
I think it's incumbent upon members of the media to I was going to say being respectfully aggressive, because I'm not the type of reporter that necessarily wants to play gotcha with a politician. I always try to be generally forthcoming, and there were parts earlier in my career where I stumbled, where I was able to know that as long as you are upfront about what you're talking about, you'll get a better answer. And that's been kind of my approach, but it's also been making sure that some of the top leaders in Missouri, both on the Republican and Democratic side, since I do cover St. Louis, which is heavily Democratic, are held accountable for their views and can also convey why they make some of these decisions. I don't know what's going to happen over the next 4 years. Who knows? Donald Trump may get reelected. It may be 8 years. So I don't know where this trend in media-politician relations is going. I just know that reporters, I think, are seen right now by a lot of people of having kind of a duty to step up and question political figures of all stripes, because we live in unprecedented times. I think that we are generally seen as trusted elements of guiding people through unprecedented times, and it gives us more responsibility and accountability on ourselves.
Even in Missouri, I've seen the Greitens administration they do media relations differently. They have a press secretary. I noticed there was a lock put on a door that normally people could walk into to go to the press secretary's office. I don't know that that's as big a deal of itself, but I've seen Donald Trump gives press conferences all the time, and I've seen the governor really limit himself to questions from the media. I think it's great to have a Facebook. I think that the bottom line is he's a younger governor, and younger politicians are going to use social media more. But maybe it seems to me that a better balance would be to use it in addition to talking to reporters instead of in place of.
I will just say this. I got to know Governor Greitens fairly well during the campaign. He came on our podcast. He came
He did very well.
and talked with both Joe Manis and I after he won the primary. I got to spend a little bit of time with him after he won the governorship, walking through North St. Louis. So he has a lot to say. I think that he is going to be very impactful on policy, probably more than any other Republican governor ever.
Already has, probably.
So I think that he should tell that story not only to the people through social media. I'm not saying he needs to stop doing that.
I agree with that.
But I also think that he needs to continue to expand talking to traditional media, and he is doing that. I want to make clear, I've seen him doing one-on-one interviews with some media outlets, but I also think he should expand that to answering questions at press conferences, both on topic and off topic. I think it'll be beneficial to him in the long run, even if the stories may not be positive. But his predecessors did that, and I think that kind of clamped down the angst a little bit.
To me, looking at it from a political standpoint, he is a very articulate guy. I mean, when he talks to the media, I don't think it's going to be, to me, it's not, I think he does himself well from what I've saw. But moreover, there's a lot of talk. He certainly doesn't tamp it down. He may run for another office someday that's a little higher. You're not going to be able to run for that office on Facebook.
Well, I don't know what's going to happen in 8 years, but as you mentioned, he does have a lot to say on policy, and he is going to effectuate tremendous change throughout the public policy realm. And I think that he should tell that story both in non-traditional ways. I have nothing against him using Facebook or Twitter to tell that story, but I also think he needs to tell that story to traditional media, and I think he also has to respond when the traditional media question him about some of his decision making, because that's our role. We are going to be, again, similar to the presidency. It's not going to be a lovey-dovey relationship. There is going to be some tension there. There was certainly some tension with myself and Governor Jay Nixon and Governor Matt Blunt, but I think it was done in a respectful way, and it was done in a way that was professional. And there are going to be times when it is going to get contentious. That's just the role of the press, and I think that he'll find that out over the next few years.
Jason Rosenbaum, thanks for joining us this week on Missouri Politics, and thanks for sticking around. Interesting debate. I think a lot of folks will appreciate your viewpoint on coverage in the media. Thanks a lot.
Well, thank you for having me.
We'll see you next week on This Week in Missouri Politics.